The silence is the first thing that strikes you. In the heart of the Amazon, silence should not exist. This is a world defined by the roar of falling rain and the relentless hum of insects. But today, standing on the parched banks of the Rio Negro, the air is unnervingly still. The water, usually like liquid obsidian, has vanished. What remains is a landscape that feels alien, a desert of cracked mud where a kingdom of water used to reign. The river levels have dropped to record lows, exposing secrets hidden for centuries. Ancient petroglyphs, carved by civilizations long gone, are now baking under a relentless sun. It is a sight that is hauntingly beautiful. The earth is showing its bones, and it is a warning we are not prepared to receive. In the shallow basins of Lake Tefé, the tragedy takes on a visceral form. The pink river dolphin, the legendary Boto, Tio has always been a symbol of the forest's life. But recently, these creatures have been found floating lifelessly by the hundreds. The water temperature here hit a staggering 39 degrees Celsius. This is a thermal trap from which there was no escape. Imagine a world where the water that is supposed to cool you suddenly turns into a boiling cauldron. This paradise for biodiversity transformed into a lethal furnace in a matter of weeks, leaving scientists in a state of absolute shock. They pull the carcasses from the water, their skin scorched by the heat, a silent testament to an ecological shift that is moving faster than our ability to document it. This is the mystery of the boiling river. It wasn't a slow transition, it was a sudden, violent transformation. The Amazon has always had its seasons, but this is fundamentally different. This is a paradise being dismantled in real time, a biological machine losing its ability to regulate itself. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. Something fundamental is changing in the architecture of the rainforest, and the forest is sending a message through the silence. A message that we aren't yet ready to hear. We have long viewed the Amazon as an indestructible green wall, but that wall is beginning to crumble. We are observing the collapse of a titan, and the consequences will be felt far beyond the borders of Brazil. If you were to fly over the canopy, you would see a jarring contrast. Above, the emerald sea of trees still stretches toward the horizon, seemingly eternal. But look closer, where the great arteries of the forest should be flowing, and you see the skeletal remains of the riverbeds. The lush canopy masks a rot that is spreading from the ground up. This isn't just another seasonal cycle. What we are witnessing is a systemic collapse. The biological machinery that has hummed for 50 million years is beginning to stutter. The humidity that defines this world is evaporating into a sky that no longer offers rain in return, leaving behind a brittle landscape that feels like it could ignite at any moment. The green heart of the planet is becoming grey. There is a controlled sense of urgency among the people who live here. The ribeirinhos, whose lives are synchronized with the pulse of the rising water, look at the dry mud with a mixture of fear and deep disbelief. They have seen droughts before, but never one that felt so profound, so final. The forest is gasping for air. Scientists are discovering that the lungs of the planet are struggling to draw a full breath as the heat intensifies beyond endurance. The fragile mechanism that regulates our global climate and moves water across entire continents is under an unprecedented and violent assault. We are watching a biological titan fall slowly to its knees. But what happens to the rest of the world when the breathing stops entirely? What happens when the life-giving moisture that feeds global agriculture stops being produced? The story of the Amazon's survival is no longer local. It is the story of our collective future, written in the cracked mud of a dying river where the pulse is fading and the ancient waters are nowhere to be found in the haze. To understand the magnitude of this collapse, we must view the Amazon as a sophisticated, 50-million-year-old biological engine. This is the ancestral engine of life. This vast emerald expanse is the oldest rainforest on Earth, a testament to structural perfection. It is a machine that endured the freezing embrace of ice ages and the violent shifting of tectonic plates that raised the Andes Mountains. Through millions of years, the Amazon maintained a self-sustaining balance, acting as the planet's primary thermostat. It didn't just survive global changes, it moderated them. For eons, this ecosystem operated with mechanical precision, recycling its own nutrients and its lifeblood, water. This stability wasn't accidental. It was the result of a complex evolutionary architecture designed to capture every drop of moisture and keep it within the system, creating a cycle that felt eternal until very recently. The machine's power lies in flying rivers. This is a literal atmospheric reality. Every day, billions of trees act as massive biological pumps. A single large tree can release up to 1,000 liters of water into the atmosphere daily through evapotranspiration. Each droplet of vapor contributes to a massive, invisible river that flows silently above our heads. When multiplied by billions of trees, the forest pumps more water into the sky than the Amazon River carries into the Atlantic Ocean. This invisible aerial ocean flows across the continent, carrying essential moisture that feeds agriculture from the plains of Argentina to the industrial hubs of southern Brazil. The forest creates its own rain, engineering its own environment to ensure survival. It is a closed loop of such immense power that it dictates rainfall patterns for an entire hemisphere. For most of its existence, this system was robust enough to withstand natural variations. The Amazon was the anchor of South American weather, a reliable engine that never stalled. However, hairline fractures in this ancient machinery appeared at the dawn of the 21st century. The great droughts of 2005 and 2010 were first indicators that the cycle was being compromised. In those years, the world watched as water levels dipped, but those events were still viewed as once-in-a-century anomalies that the forest could recover from. We believed a machine this vast was too big to fail. But the current crisis has shattered that illusion. Unlike previous droughts, the water isn't just receding, it's being erased. The frequency of these events has increased, leaving the forest no time to heal or replenish moisture reserves between one heat wave and the next. The ground itself is becoming a tomb for the roots that once drank deeply from the earth. We are witnessing a violent pattern interruption. The majesty of deep history is being overtaken by the sudden, frantic shifts of our modern era. The transition from a self-regulating paradise to a volatile system has happened in the blink of an evolutionary eye. While the forest survived millions of years of natural shifts, it wasn't designed for the accelerated pressures of today. The pincer movement of a warming North Atlantic and an intensified El Niño is squeezing the life out of the basin with a ferocity that defies historical records. The ancient engine is no longer just sputtering, it's beginning to smoke. The majestic green canopy, once a symbol of infinite life, is now a portrait of vulnerability. The biological machine that stabilized our world for 50 million years is being pushed beyond its operating limits. The pumps that move the water are failing. We are seeing the gears seize. As soil dries and humidity drops, trees can no longer perform the miracle of evapotranspiration. They shut their pores to conserve moisture, which means they stop releasing water into the sky. When trees stop pumping, the flying rivers dry up. It is a catastrophic chain reaction where the mechanism the forest uses to stay alive becomes the instrument of its demise. The machine is breaking. Gears are grinding in a dry, heat-saturated friction changing the chemistry of the air. This isn't just a lack of rain. It's the permanent failure of the world's vital moisture recycling plant. The heart of the planet is losing its rhythm. And as biological pumps fail, the silence of dry riverbeds becomes a deafening roar of warning for a world depending on the Amazon's breath. The flying rivers, those grand atmospheric corridors of life, have turned into ghosts. Where once a dense, humid haze signaled the arrival of daily storms, The sky is now a hard, unyielding blue. The rain is simply not arriving anymore. It is as if the sky has forgotten its ancient promise to the canopy below. This isn't just a local weather shift. It is a fundamental severance of the forest's circulatory system. The clouds that do form are often wispy and thin, lacking the density to fall as water. They tease the thirsty roots below and then evaporate into the scorched air before a single drop can reach the soil. The silence in the atmosphere is as chilling as the silence in the riverbeds. Without the arrival of these moisture plumes, the Amazon is essentially being disconnected from the global water cycle, left to survive on reserves that have already reached their limits. This collapse is being driven by a brutal pincer movement, a dual-fronted climatic assault that the forest has no historical precedent for. To the west, the Pacific Ocean is gripped by an intensified El Niño, a phenomenon that triggers massive shifts in air pressure and suppresses the formation of rain clouds over the Amazon basin. Simultaneously, to the north, the tropical North Atlantic is experiencing record-breaking heat. These two oceanic giants are working in a grim, accidental harmony. The warming Atlantic pulls the rain-producing trade winds away from the forest, while the El Niño pushes dry air down from the upper atmosphere. Together, they create a thermal lid over the basin, a trap that keeps the moisture out and the heat in. It is an invisible siege. A leaf deep in the heart of the jungle, perhaps 1,000 miles from the nearest coast, is dictated by the temperature of waters it will never touch. The fate of a single seedling is tied to a heat wave in the middle of the ocean, a connection that highlights the terrifying fragility of our interconnected world. As the moisture vanishes, the forest enters a lethal feedback loop, a self-reinforcing cycle of destruction. It is the physics of a nightmare. Less rain leads to more ambient heat, as there is no water to evaporate and cool the air. This heat puts immense physiological stress on the trees, which react by closing their stomata to save water. But in doing so, they stop transpiring, which means the atmosphere becomes even drier. When the stress becomes too much, the trees die. These giants, which once acted as cooling towers for the planet, now become dry, brittle skeletons. Dead trees do not create rain, they only absorb heat. Every hectare of dying forest amplifies the drought for the neighboring hectare. The moisture recycling machine is not just slowing down, it is actively turning against itself, accelerating the transformation of a lush sanctuary into a parched wasteland. What haunts the researchers most is that this breakdown is happening far faster than any of their computer models predicted. Scientists trekking into the deep interior are finding that areas previously considered drought-resistant are crumbling. They stand in the shadows of giants that have stood for centuries, holding humidity sensors that read like they are in a desert rather than a rainforest. These men and women are witnessing a forest that is literally turning to dust in their hands. They track the humidity levels with a sense of mounting dread, watching the numbers drop day after day, month after month. The air they breathe is thick with the scent of dried leaves and parched earth, a smell that shouldn't exist here. They are documenting the disappearance of a world in real time, realizing that the resilience they once admired in the Amazon was predicated on a climate that no longer exists. This brings us to the most terrifying realization of all. If the rain does not return, if the flying rivers remain silent, the Amazon faces a threat it has no biological defense against: fire. A rainforest is naturally resistant to flame because of its constant moisture, but that shield is gone. The forest has become a massive, continent-sized tinderbox, waiting for a single spark to unleash a catastrophic inferno. The very substance of the jungle is being prepared for a fiery end. The heat is a silent killer, more pervasive and insidious than the flames that occasionally flicker at the forest's edge. While the world's attention was captured by the haunting images of pink river dolphins floating lifeless in Lake Tefé, those casualties were the most visible symbols of a much broader and more devastating wildlife massacre unfolding across the entire basin. Beneath the receding, murky surfaces of thousands of unnamed tributaries and hidden lagoons, a biological purge of unimaginable scale is taking place. This isn't a natural thinning of the herd or a standard seasonal struggle. It is a systemic erasure of life. The Amazonian manatee, a gentle, ancient resident of these waters, now finds itself marooned on suffocating mud banks. As the water retreats with terrifying speed, these heavy creatures are left stranded in the open air, their bodies crushed by their own weight as the tropical sun bakes the mud into a hard, unforgiving crust. This tragedy extends deep into the unseen layers of the river. Fish species by the thousands are facing a localized extinction event. In the Amazon, water temperature is the rhythm of existence, but that rhythm has been distorted into a death knell. Most aquatic species in this region have evolved over millions of years to thrive within an incredibly narrow thermal window. Scientists have observed that many of these creatures simply cannot survive even a 2-degree increase in water temperature. As the shallowing rivers absorb the relentless solar radiation, they transform into thermal traps. The water loses its capacity to hold dissolved oxygen, creating vast dead zones where the fish are literally drowning in the very element meant to sustain them. Their silver, bloated bodies now line the riverbanks for miles, a testament to a world that has become too hot to support its own residents. The forest itself is becoming eerily quiet, giving birth to what researchers call the silent forest. This reality stands in jarring contrast to the vibrant Eden portrayed in nature documentaries. The birds, the citizens of the canopy, are vanishing from the soundscape. Brilliant macaws and toucans rely on specific humidity levels to regulate their internal temperatures and maintain the integrity of their plumage. Without the cooling moisture once provided by the now failing flying rivers, these birds are forced into a state of lethargy, retreating into the deepest shadows of the shrinking foliage. Their songs have been replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. Even the insects, the invisible gears of the rainforest machine, are suffering. Ants, beetles, and pollinators that thrive in the damp leaf litter are dying in the parched, brittle remains of the forest floor, halting the vital process of nutrient cycling and leaving the trees even more vulnerable. There is no great migration occurring here, because in the Amazon, there is nowhere left to run. Unlike the vast plains of Africa, where herds can trek for miles to find a new water source, the Amazon is a labyrinth of rapidly disconnecting pools. As the great rivers fragment into isolated stagnant puddles, animals are lured into smaller and smaller spaces in a desperate search for hydration. This creates a terrifying proximity between species that would normally avoid each other. Jaguars are being driven out of the deep woods toward the last remaining damp spots. Here, the predator and the prey are forced to share the same cracked mud, united by a thirst that has long since overridden the instinct to hunt or flee. They are all simply waiting for a rain that feels more like a myth than a reality. This grey, smoke-filled landscape is the new face of the Amazon. The vibrant greens of the canopy have been bleached into a dull, dehydrated brown, and the air is thick with the smell of wood smoke and rotting organic matter. The loss of keystone species is the most alarming scientific fact emerging from this disaster. Certain species of fish and birds are the agents for dispersing the seeds of the carbon-dense trees in the forest. As these animals perish from thermal stress or lack of food, the forest's ability to regenerate itself is being severed at the root. It is a cascading collapse. The death of a single species of fish can mean the eventual disappearance of an entire tree species decades later. The Amazon is becoming a graveyard where only the scavengers thrive. Vultures circle, their dark shapes patrolling a sky that has turned leaden, feasting on a world that is losing its pulse. While the biological tragedy unfolds across the vast green canopy, a human crisis of equal magnitude is strangling the people who call this intricate labyrinth home. For the indigenous communities and the riverside dwellers known as the ribeirinhos, the river is not merely a feature of the geography. It is their only highway, their primary supermarket, and their absolute lifeline to the civilization beyond the trees. When the water vanishes, the world effectively ends at the very edge of the village. The great liquid veins of the Amazon have withered, leaving thousands of families stranded on islands of mud. Canoes and motorized boats, which have been the primary modes of transport for generations, now sit uselessly on cracked riverbeds, hundreds of yards away from the receding and unreachable waterline. This isolation is not just a logistical inconvenience. It has become a lethal bottleneck for survival. Essential food supplies can no longer reach remote settlements that rely on trade for basics they cannot grow in the parched soil. Medicine for common illnesses remains stuck in cargo holds in distant urban hubs because there is no channel deep enough to navigate safely. In villages where the rhythmic sound of an outboard motor once signaled the arrival of hope, there is now only the oppressive hum of insects and the suffocating weight of the heat. Children who used to commute by boat to regional schools are now confined to their small clearings, their education suspended by a landscape that has become entirely impassable. The elderly, particularly vulnerable in this relentless thermal stress, find themselves trapped in villages with no access to clean drinking water. It is a cruel irony that in the heart of the world's largest freshwater basin, people are now suffering from dehydration or falling ill from drinking the stagnant, pathogen-heavy pools that remain in the shadows of the drying banks. The crisis extends far beyond the remote riverbanks and into the heart of modern civilization. In urban centers like Manaus, the sky has turned a bruised, apocalyptic orange. A toxic haze, thick with the microscopic particles of a burning forest, has descended upon millions of residents. These are forest fires that shouldn't exist in a rainforest, yet they have become a seasonal nightmare fueled by the unprecedented lack of moisture. This smoke invasion is so dense that at times the sun is reduced to a pale, ghostly disk, and it becomes impossible to see buildings just across the street. Local hospitals are now overflowing, not with victims of a new pandemic, but with thousands of children and elderly people struggling to draw a single clean breath. The staggering rise of respiratory diseases is a direct physical manifestation of the forest's own agony. Yet, there is a deeper, more invisible wound appearing, the psychological toll of watching one's world evaporate. There is a profound sense of mourning among those who have lived in harmony with the rhythm of the flood for centuries. An elder of a riverside community, a man whose face is a map of 80 years of seasons, sits on his wooden porch and stares out at the vast expanse of white sand where a deep river channel once flowed. His voice sounds like dry leaves skittering across the thirsty ground as he recounts the history of the basin. He explains that he has seen great droughts before, but he has never seen the earth show its bones like this. To him, the newly exposed jagged rocks and the skeletal remains of ancient trees rising from the mud are not just geological features. They are a dark omen of a world out of balance. He describes the river as a living being that has been drained of its lifeblood, leaving behind a corpse that the sun is slowly consuming. His testimony bridges the academic gap between scientific data and lived reality, confirming that the normal cycles of the past have been shattered by a force he cannot name, but feels in the marrow of his bones. This localized suffering is merely the first domino in a sequence that will eventually touch every corner of the globe. The plight of the ribeirinho is a stark preview of a global atmospheric shift that is already in motion. As the Amazon's human and biological systems fail in tandem, the nature of our planet's climate regulation is being rewritten. This isn't just a regional disaster. It is a structural failure of the Earth's primary life support system. The smoke hanging over Manaus is a signal fire, warning us that the moisture which once cooled the entire planet is being replaced by a heat that knows no borders. We are witnessing the breakdown of a relationship that has sustained humanity for millennia, as the forest transforms from a provider into a victim, and eventually into a herald of a much harsher, drier world that awaits us all. The invisible line that scientists have feared for decades is no longer a distant theoretical boundary. It is a threshold we are stepping over in real time. This is the tipping point, a biological crossroads where the world's largest rainforest ceases to function as a self-sustaining system. For 50 million years, the Amazon has survived by creating its own weather, but that ancient cycle is now stalling. Researchers have identified a critical limit. If deforestation and forest degradation reach a threshold of 20 to 25% of the original forest area, the entire ecosystem will face an irreversible collapse. This is not a slow, manageable decline that we can easily reverse through simple replanting efforts or conservation policies. It is a fundamental, violent shift in the very laws of the landscape. We are witnessing the onset of the savannization of the Amazon, a process where a lush, humid jungle is forcibly transformed into a dry, fire-prone grassland that resembles a degraded savanna. This savanna trap is a biological one-way street with no easy exit. In a healthy rainforest, the dense, multi-layered canopy creates a cool, moist microclimate that protects the forest floor and fuels the rain. But as the trees disappear, that protective canopy is breached, allowing the harsh, direct sun to bake the earth. The humidity drops, the moisture recycling fails, and the delicate tropical trees die off, replaced by scrubby grasses and drought-resistant vegetation. Once this transition begins, the forest can never truly become a rainforest again. The biological conditions that allowed the jungle to flourish for eons are being erased. The grass brings fire, and fire prevents the slow-growing tropical trees from returning, locking the land into a permanent state of ecological degradation. What was once a deep, emerald sanctuary is becoming a hollowed-out landscape of dust, thorns, and heat. The most terrifying aspect of this shift is the emergence of the carbon bomb. For all of human history, the Amazon has served as the planet's greatest carbon sink, a massive green lung that inhaled our excess carbon dioxide and breathed out life-sustaining oxygen. But as the trees wither and the fires spread, that ancient relationship is being violently inverted. The Amazon is switching from a carbon sink to a carbon source. Instead of absorbing our industrial pollution, the dying forest is now releasing billions of tons of stored carbon back into the atmosphere. Every rotting trunk and every acre lost to the flames adds more fuel to the global furnace, accelerating the very warming that is killing the forest in the first place. It is a feedback loop of existential proportions, where the forest's death becomes a catalyst for its own destruction and the destruction of the global climate. The shockwaves of this collapse will not be confined to South America. The Amazon is the biological thermostat of the entire planet, and its failure will be felt in the streets of New York, the parks of London, and the industrial centers of Beijing. The flying rivers that originate here are the primary drivers of rainfall patterns across the globe. Without them, the agricultural heartlands of North America will face permanent droughts, and the weather systems that regulate the Northern Hemisphere will become increasingly erratic and violent. We are beginning to realize that the drought in the Rio Negro is intimately connected to the heat waves in Europe and the catastrophic floods in Asia. The planet is a single interconnected organism, and the Amazon is its beating heart. When the heart fails, the entire body begins to suffer. This realization brings us to a painful existential truth. We are not merely observing a natural disaster from a distance. We are the ones fueling the furnace. Every choice made in distant boardrooms, and every ton of carbon emitted by industrial societies, is a direct strike against the survival of this forest. We have treated the Amazon as an inexhaustible resource for too long, failing to recognize that its health is the prerequisite for our own civilizational stability. The mystery that now keeps scientists awake at night is no longer whether the tipping point will happen, but whether it has already occurred. Some experts suggest that in the southern regions of the Amazon, where the dry season has grown longer and the temperatures have soared, the threshold was crossed 5 years ago. They point to the silent, parched stretches of land where the rain no longer falls as it used to, even when the season dictates it should. If the southern Amazon has already tipped, we are looking at a future that is arriving much faster than our models predicted. The forest is screaming for help, and we are finally realizing now that the heavy silence which follows might be permanent. The shift from a liquid kingdom to a domain of fire and dust is not merely a change in scenery. It is a fundamental betrayal of the forest's ancient nature. For eons, the Amazon has been defined by its saturation, a place where the air was heavy enough to taste and every leaf dripped with the promise of the next storm. Now, that liquid identity is being burned away by the relentless pincer movement of a warming ocean and a drying sky. The transformation is rapid, violent, and absolute. We are watching the world's nursery turn into a scorched graveyard, where the soil no longer remembers the cooling touch of a deep flood. The transition from a carbon-sequestering paradise to a source of atmospheric poison is the final warning from a system that has been pushed beyond its limits. It is a scream in the form of a heat wave, a desperate signal that the biological clock of the basin is winding down. The transformation is not just ecological, it is a spiritual blow to those anchored to the water. The Amazon is not some distant, exotic garden, tucked away in the corner of a map. It is the biological thermostat of the planet we all share. Every breath we take and harvest we reap is influenced by the moisture pumping through these green arteries. To ignore the low levels of the Rio Negro is to ignore a malfunction in the machinery that keeps our climate stable. We are inextricably linked to the fate of these trees. When the Amazon's heart slows, the ripples are felt in the grain belts of the Midwest, the water tables of Central Europe, and the monsoon cycles across Asia. We have lived under the illusion of separation for too long, imagining our progress was independent of nature. Now, the forest is showing us that the web of life is fragile, and we are the ones pulling at the threads that hold our own civilization together. We find ourselves at a historical crossroads, standing between two vastly different futures. On one side lies the path of restoration, a future where we recognize the forest's intrinsic value and fight to restore its broken cycles before the savanna trap closes for good. On the other side is a future of permanent ecological instability, a world where the flying rivers are merely a myth told to children, and the Amazon is a dry, barren memory of what was once the Earth's greatest treasure. We are the last generation that will ever have the opportunity to see the forest as it was intended to be. A vast, unbroken expanse of emerald life that breathes for the world. Our children may only know a fragmented version, a ghost of the original majesty, unless we act with the urgency that this systemic collapse demands. The responsibility is heavy, but it is also a profound privilege to be the ones who can still turn the tide. As the sun rises over the parched bed of the Rio Negro, casting long orange shadows across the exposed mud and the skeletal remains of trees that should be underwater, the visual weight of the crisis becomes undeniable. This is not just a collection of data or a series of satellite images. It is the manifestation of a world out of balance. The earth showing its bones, as the elder described it, is a sight that should haunt our collective conscience. We must look beyond the headlines and see the systemic connections that bind our lifestyles to the survival of the jaguar, the manatee, and the pink river dolphin. The challenge is to understand that every ton of carbon reduced and every acre of forest protected is a direct investment in the stability of our own future. But time is a luxury we no longer possess. This year, the rains are late. Every afternoon, the ribeirinhos stand on the banks of rivers that have become roads of sand, searching the horizon for a sign of relief. Yet the sky remains a brilliant blue. The silence in the forest is deepening, broken only by the crackle of dry leaves and the smell of smoke that refuses to dissipate. If the rains do not come soon, if the pumps fail this season, the Amazon we know will be gone by the time the next season arrives. We are left with a question that vibrates through the parched air. What if the forest has finally stopped breathing for us? The answer depends entirely on what we do before the final drop of moisture evaporates into the heat of a changing world.